Good morning, and thank you for joining us for Migration and Climate Change. This is the first of 20 events that the Center for Environmental Inquiry at SSU is producing this fall and winter. My name is Margot Rollins. I'm a program coordinator with the center. Normally our public events are held on one of our preserves. We have the Fairfield Osborne Preserve on Sonoma Mountain in Pengrove, and we have the Galbraith Wildlands Preserve, which is in Mendocino, southern Mendocino County. But of course, with the COVID, we have had to pivot to virtual, and we're really excited about being able to bring in a bigger audience than we were able to take on to the preserve in reality. We usually pass around a sign-up sheet, but in lieu of that, I'm going to ask you all just to take a minute, if you wouldn't mind, to put your name in the chat. And if you don't want everyone to see that, and you can send it just to me, Margot Rollins, or put it in for everyone, whichever you prefer. Before I let our leader, Kevin Munroe, take it away today, I wanted to just tell you briefly about the Center for Environmental Inquiry and our role in helping people in the North Bay particularly get ready for environmental sustainability. The center, we work together with students, with faculty, with community members, with corporations, from nonprofits, in order to create a sustainable community for all of us to live in, and to address some of the tough environmental challenges that we're all trying to deal with. We do that by providing firsthand understanding of all of our relationship with the world around us, with our natural world, and also by skill building and teaching people things that they can use, which is what we're doing today in terms of things that Kevin's going to be showing you that will have a positive impact on migration and our winged migrants as they come through where we live. Today we're focusing not only on birds, but on bats and butterflies and dragonflies. And Kevin is going to take us through a look at all of these creatures and how the climate change has affected them. Kevin is the Long Island Preserves Director for the Nature Conservancy. He worked for the Center for Environmental Inquiry for a while, and he also was the Executive Director of the Laguna de Santa Rosa Foundation in Santa Rosa before he moved back to New York. I think you all are on mute at the moment. If you have something you want to say, you can do it in the chat, and I will be monitoring that throughout Kevin's presentation. And Kevin is going to make a presentation. He's going to present for 30 minutes. We may have to shorten it a little bit because we got such a late start with the problems we've had. And we may have to go over a little bit in order to accommodate what people are, the questions and concerns and interests that people have. But we will be doing the presentation, and then we will have breakouts. I think all of you probably got the memo that I sent out, the email about things that the projects that Kevin is going to lead us through. And so he will do that for 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll get back for question and answers. So if you save your questions for the end, that would be great. If you have a burning question and a communication that you need to make, just put it in the chat, and I will be monitoring that throughout Kevin's presentation. I think that's basically the points that I wanted to cover. So Kevin, it's your show.
Excellent. Thank you, Margot. It's so good to be here with all of you. It's exciting for me to be virtually in California with you all. I had such a good time with Margot and Carrie and the rest of the team at SSU when I was out there. I guess it was about a year ago. And I'm also really enjoying being here on Long Island, working for the Nature Conservancy. And I realize I'm a bit of a migrant myself, so it's no coincidence that I chose this topic. Really enjoy going back and forth between the two coasts. I am sort of learning about migration and climate change with all of you. They're such really interesting, complex topics. I'm really excited to be learning with you today. And I want to mention, we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff, sort of throwing a lot of information at you. As Margot said, this is being recorded. So don't worry about sort of memorizing what we talk about. You can go back and look at the recording after Margot sends it to you. Also, Margot and I are going to stay on for several minutes afterwards to answer questions and talk. So we'll have a chance for more conversation then. And I will be, with Margot, sending out sort of a resource list later that has all sorts of links and information. So you'll have lots of opportunities to sort of follow up from today. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here and get started. Okay, hopefully everybody can see this. So yeah, we're gonna be talking about migration and climate change today. I'm gonna sort of focus, as Margot said, on winged migrants like butterflies and birds and dragonflies. And also I'm gonna focus on a neighborhood approach, which for today's purposes is going to be mostly Northern California. I've got a couple friends here from Virginia, which is great, and a lot of this will pertain to that area as well, but our focus will be Northern California. Okay, just trying to get this to, having some. Okay, folks, I'm just having a little issues getting it to advance, so hold on a second. Okay, there we go. Okay, so the first question is who migrates, right? Like most of us think of birds when we think of animals that migrate, but there's all these other critters that do as well. Whales and aphids, earthworms and eagles, beetles and bats, plankton, reindeer and butterflies, and much more, many more. Most animals really have some sort of seasonal movements. And this chart shows sort of some of the champions, so to speak. And also shows that we're still learning about this because the monarch butterfly has now been bumped as the longest insect migrant. It's now the wandering glider, which is a dragonfly, which has a one-way migration of 6,000 kilometers. And I just read something today that we're thinking some monarchs may migrate even more than that. So it's sort of a contest between the two. We are learning as we go. And then the bird at the bottom there, the common swift, 10 months without landing. They fly nonstop without roosting or landing for 10 months, which is just incredible. So the things that happen during migration are amazing. So what is migration? Well, there's a definition up there. The what's in italics in the quotes, actually Oxford Dictionary definition, seasonal movement of animals from one region to another. It can also be for the purposes of weather or food issues, even in the middle of a season. So it's not always seasonal. There's some definitions here we're going to touch on really briefly, and then we're not going to worry about them too much the rest of the presentation. Most animals don't follow these exact definitions, but it's a good place to start. So the two basic types are obligate and facultative. An obligate migrant means they must, they have to, because of food needs that they have. Most animals that we think of as migrants are obligate migrants, and most of them are obligate completes, which means all members of that species, different ages and sexes, all migrate at the same time. But as you'll see under 1B there are also some migrants where males, females, and different ages migrate at different times, like kestrels, where the males and females have slightly different migration timings and routes. And then under facultative, that just means that it's a species that doesn't always migrate. It does sometimes. One example of that is a facultative partial migrant, like the American robin. Some members of the species will migrate, others won't, depends on the year, the season, the location. And then the last one there, interruptive, those are animals that migrate occasionally, usually because of a food shortage, like snowy owls that will sort of have these eruptive winters where they all fly south because of a lemmings shortage, or the pallid-winged grasshopper, which lives right there in California, which has migrations depending on weather conditions periodically. So why do animals migrate? We sort of touched on that. Two basic reasons. It's either seasonal resources or seasonal conditions. Some of the seasonal resources might include flower nectar. Hummingbirds have to migrate when winter comes and flowers stop blooming. Bats have to migrate because the insects they need to eat are no longer there in the winter. Some seasonal conditions, got some listed there, pretty self-explanatory. The wandering glider, that's that champion 6,000 kilometer migrator. They will migrate depending on air currents, just sort of whenever they want. They sort of move back and forth across the planet depending on air currents. And then I have a quick picture of a common porwell up there, which is related to nighthawks and whippoorwills. It's the only bird we know of, at least at the moment here in North America, that actually hibernates. They will go into a slight torpor, and they live there in California. So some of them migrate, some of them will go into a cave and go into torpor. So lots of variety. So here's a really impressive and famous example you've probably heard of. This is the bar-tailed godwit, which is one of the champions of migration. Look at this. This critter is going from Alaska to Asia to New Zealand, almost 30,000 kilometers in 1 year, really incredible, flying all over the place. And this is one of the species that actually reduces the size of some of their organs before flying to make flight more efficient. So they go through all sorts of changes, including actually reducing the size of some of their organs so they'll be lighter. So I really want to talk about some of our lesser known migrants, some of theirs.
What's the name of that bird in that last slide?
Oh yeah, that is the bar-tailed godwit. Now, if you're in California, you probably won't see this, but you might see the marbled godwit. So this is a kind of sandpiper, and you can see its relatives at Point Reyes. That's the bar-tailed godwit. Good question. So this one here, this is the flammulated owl. This is the second smallest owl in North America, and it is an insect specialist. It only eats, it might occasionally eat a tiny mouse or a lizard, but it almost exclusively eats insects. So it's one of our few owls that has to migrate. It's an obligate migrant because it has to chase those insects, as you can see in this map, all the way down to South America. And this is a good opportunity to look at these complex ranges. The orange is where it breeds. The blue down in Central America is where it migrates in the winter. And those little tiny purple spots at the base of that yellow oval, that's where they can stay all year round. All the conditions are just right. So you can see this flammulated owl, along with many birds, has a very complicated year depending on where it lives. They're going to migrate through at night. So you may have a flammulated owl, a tiny owl about the size of a chunky bluebird. You may have one in your yard this fall at night and not even know it. Another lesser known, often unseen migrant is the Mexican, also called Brazilian free-tailed bat. Amazing critter. They've been found to fly 11,000 feet up, which is where some airplanes are. We believe it's the fastest living animal on the planet, 99.42 miles per hour. We used to think it was a type of swift. Peregrines are faster when they're diving, but in actual straight flight, we believe this is the fastest living animal on the planet, which is pretty cool. They eat 20 different moth species, including 40 different kinds of pests. They're very important for farmers. You can see from this map, they breed in California, among other places, and then they all go down to hibernate in caves in Mexico and point south. So they have this really impressive migration. Despite their very large numbers, climate change is changing the timing of when their moth prey emerge. And it's also causing some potential disease issues. So even this bat that numbers in the millions is declining because of climate change issues. So here's another migrant. There are 13 species of dragonflies that migrate in the US. There's at least 7 of them, and I have them listed there under Bay Area dragonflies, at least 7 that migrate through the San Francisco Bay Area. One of them is that wandering glider that's also called a globe skimmer because it lives around the world and migrates, among other places, from India to Somalia, Africa. They've been found flying 6,200 meters up through the Himalayas. Then there's also the common green darner on the left-hand side of your screen, which has had tiny radio transmitters glued to its body in Cape May, New Jersey, and they've been found to fly as much as 100 miles a day, which is about as far as monarchs can fly in a day when they're migrating, and they often follow the same route as birds. So let's step back a little bit and look at the 4 different seasonal wildlife communities. Helps us understand how complicated this is. Number one, there are year-round residents like great horned owls and scrub jays, which do not migrate. They are there in Mendocino, Sonoma, and Marin County 365 days a year. They might have slight seasonal shifts, but they do not migrate. Then number two, you have winter visitors. These are birds that when they fly south, for them, that means spending the winter in Sonoma County. They breed in points north, and when they fly south, that takes them to Santa Rosa and Sebastopol and Yorkville and Fairfax. So you only see them in the winter there in Northern California. Then you have summer visitors like the Mexican free-tailed bat and the Bullock's oriole, which they fly north in the spring from South America, which is where they spend the winter. They end up in Sonoma County, among other places. So they breed in the late spring and summer in Northern California. So you only see them when they come up to raise babies in the late spring and summer. Then lastly, we have spring and fall passing migrants like the rufous hummingbird and hoary bat. They do not spend any significant amount of time in most of Northern California, with some exceptions. And by Northern California right now, I'm sorry, I'm specifically talking about Mendocino, Sonoma, and Marin counties. And those three counties, they just pass through. You just see them in spring and fall on their way to somewhere else. So let's talk a little bit about scale. Many wildlife species have these vast migratory routes of huge scale, vast country-sized, ocean-spanning migrations that are often north to south, different biomes, different countries, different geographical zones. It's a huge scale. But there are also many animals that do what we just call seasonal shifts or local movements on a smaller scale, like the tree swallow in the upper right-hand part of your screen, also the violet-green swallow. Both of these are out there in California. They move really east-west. They might move from the Santa Rosa Plain in Sonoma County out to Point Reyes because it's a couple degrees warmer there with a few more insects, maybe more wax myrtle berries for them to eat. So they're moving mostly east-west, and you can see from this map that those that live in those purple areas, those are the ones that are in that same area year-round, so they just do an east-west shift, where birds that live in those other areas have a larger migration. So it really depends where they live. The other animals here, the California thrasher and the western pipistrelle, they have what I would call topographical or vertical migration. They just move up and down a mountain. In the summer, they're going to be up at the top of the Mayacama Hills or up at the top of the Sierras. And then in the winter, they're simply going to have a vertical movement. They're going to move down to the lowlands where it's warmer and there's more food. So they just move up and down a mountain, really, kind of a vertical migration. Incidentally, that bat right there is the smallest bat in the United States, and they're right there in Northern California. Another type of seasonal movement or migration are winter eruptions. If you're a bird watcher, you know all about this. You're always hoping that each winter is going to be an eruptive year for these exciting northern finches like evening grosbeaks or red crossbills. They're only going to erupt south if there's a shortage of their food, which is pine, fir, and spruce seeds in the north, and they might erupt south. So it's not every year. Boreal owls, great gray owls, snowy owls, they're going to erupt south if there's a shortage of their prey species, which are various types of rodents. So this is intermittent. You can't ever count on this. It's sort of a eruption that you're not quite sure if it's going to happen. And it has to do with food shortages. So I say migration myth here. It's not really a myth. It's maybe more of a misconception. Birds do fly south in the fall. But my point is that many birds do something different. They don't always fly south. The Heermann's gull, probably our most beautiful gull in my opinion in the United States, flies west first. After raising its babies in Baja California, it flies west to the coast. Then it flies north. Instead of flying south in the late summer and fall, it flies north from Baja California all the way up to Canada, to British Columbia, following brown pelicans' nesting season as they go, because the Heermann's gall is basically a parasite that most of its food comes from chasing brown pelicans and forcing them to regurgitate fish and then eating it. So it's following the breeding cycle of brown pelicans all the way up to Canada, and then it turns around and flies all the way back down to Mexico. And then you can see some other examples here. Herons actually flying north instead of south. Rufous hummingbirds doing that vertical movement up and down the mountain. So the lesson here is that most wildlife, especially our winged migrants, are almost in constant motion. They are moving most of the time in various directions. It's not always a simple north-south. Here's another example, sooty shearwaters, which create sort of a constant summer by moving around the oceans of the globe. As you see on this map, they're constantly moving, following shrimp and fish around the planet. Here's a butterfly, California tortoiseshell, that's maybe 1/3 the size of a monarch, and yet they fly up to the top of Mount Lassen. If you've ever been at Mount Lassen up in Northern California, there's snow there in July and August. It's that high. I've hiked up there in July when you have to walk across crunching snow and ice, and there's nothing up there but ravens, rosy finches, and this crazy little butterfly, thousands of them. You don't expect them to see them on rocks and snow. They are moving through the Sierras because the plants they need to lay their eggs are sort of on the other side. So they have this amazing migration where they go from the Central Valley up through the snows of Mount Lassen. Monarchs, of course, we know about. There's an eastern population and a western population, which we've always said stay separate. We've just learned recently that scientists have found that both populations mix occasionally in Arizona and New Mexico. They're able to look at stable isotopes of hydrogen inside the butterflies that correlate to plants from different parts of the country. So you can see that they do these huge migrations. The longest of them is 3,000 miles. Don't worry about all the wording here. I just wanted you to see the map on the right-hand side, that the monarchs that migrate in California, to them, Northern California coast is incredibly important. That's where these millions of butterflies hibernate, is right there in the Northern California coast. It takes them 4 generations. Generation 4 flies all the way down and hibernates on the coast, and then it takes 3 more generations to get all the way back up to Washington and British Columbia before they come back down. There are over 200 overwintering sites in Northern California for butterflies. Over 200. Almost all of them are along the coast because it's more temperate winter temperatures, and they almost always hibernate in large evergreen trees like Monterey pines or eucalyptus. The closest one to most of you is probably Robb Hill in the Presidio, just above San Francisco, so it's quite close. Most of the big spots are down near Monterey and Santa Cruz. So unfortunately, all monarchs in North America are in huge trouble. Their populations have plummeted, absolutely plummeted. The Western population of monarchs is in more trouble than the East Coast. Their populations, as you can see, have dropped alarmingly, and part of that is climate change. Some of the effects of climate change on monarchs have been the timing of when the milkweed comes out that monarchs depend on have changed because of warmer temperatures, and monarchs show up to the milkweed fields and the plant is already past its peak because of climate change. Extreme drought because of climate change, extreme weather events, and heat. All of these things, along with development and pesticides, have drastically reduced their population. So this slide is pretty busy. I'm just going to read part of this. It's how is climate change affecting wildlife? Warming temperatures around the globe result in flowers, fruits, insects, plankton, and other food sources emerging earlier because of seasons and weather cycles shifting and changing. However, many animals use light and length of day as their primary cue to start their migratory travels, especially birds and mammals. While the plants and smaller animals they feed on, insects and plankton, often react more to changing temperature because they're smaller. This means very hungry, often near starving migrants arrive at their spring, fall, summer, or winter homes after their primary food source has passed. You can sum this up by saying that animals are becoming separated from their food webs too quickly to adapt and evolve. There's nothing wrong with climate change. It's natural. What's happening is that we are making it happen way too fast. Because of things that people are doing, climate change is happening way too fast. And that's the issue. It's the speed and the scale. Animals are not able to adapt and evolve because of the speed at how it's happening, which means large extinctions. You can think of all these animals and their prey species being intricate puzzle pieces. When those puzzle pieces don't meet anymore, you have a cascading effect of negative ripples and a domino effect, which causes all sorts of issues. And I've listed a few examples. Bats and swallows that migrate, and when they show up at their new home, the flying insects they depend on have already passed or haven't come out yet because of temperature change. Bats depend on caves being a certain temperature because of climate change. If that temperature is off by 1 or 2 degrees, millions of bats can die. Shearwaters and other pelagic birds travel across the planet because they're counting on certain fish and shrimp and other ocean life to have explosive breeding cycles. Well, because of climate change, the timing is off. They arrive, the food they're supposed to eat isn't there, many of them die. Down there at the bottom, pollinators. Some pollinators are becoming separated from the plants they depend on because of climate change. So what wildlife and habitats are most vulnerable to climate change? Well, rising sea levels means coastlines and islands, obviously, are very vulnerable. Some of the earliest species that have already become extinct because of climate change are island living species, where the islands are literally becoming smaller. Also, habitats that depend on very cold temperatures like tundra, ice sheets, and snowpack. Shallow wetlands that are drying up because of extreme temperatures and drought. Some more systems there. Also extreme weather, more storms, more fires, more hurricanes. Think of all these animals flying back and forth across the planet. They're at the mercy of this extreme weather. And this one quote here, some animals have moved as much as 17 kilometers per decade to get closer to the poles because of climate change. And that's an old number, it's larger now. So let's bring this home to our neighborhoods. There are these feathered waves of birds moving through our suburban neighborhoods. These are just some of the birds that are in Northern California suburban neighborhoods. I have listed these because there is a National Audubon Society website where if you put in your zip code or county, anywhere in the country, it will tell you instantly exactly what bird species in that county and zip code are directly threatened by climate change. These species I have chosen because these are specifically threatened by climate change in Sonoma County right now as we speak, and they can all be attracted to your yards. So you can help these birds and they all need your help. I said seen and unseen in part because many of them migrate at night. These radar maps show these millions of birds moving around the country in spring at night, and you can see there are some big arrows and yellow and orange blotches in Northern California. It's an important part of their migratory route. Another interesting neighborhood migrant that's in trouble because of climate change is the Vox swift. They form these big fall flocks that hang out in chimneys overnight. And there's a street in Sebastopol where they all go into one chimney in this little backyard in Sebastopol. It's cool to see. There are fewer chimneys these days, and a lot of people cap them. You can make your own chimney like this Boy Scout has and help give Vox swifts places around the country. So what can you do right in your own backyard to help all these critters? You can build your own backyard migratory waystation so they can rest, refuel, and journey on. There are birds that need your help all year, but if you focus on spring and fall when migration is highest, you'll have the most impact. Plant early spring flowers that attract insects. So migrating vireos and orioles and tanagers and warblers can eat the insects that come to those flowers. I've listed a few of them there. Also in the late summer, fall migration really starts in August. Late summer and fall give them fatty, caloric fruits that help fuel their migration. Some great Northern California fatty native fruits are coffeeberry, red twig dogwood is probably the best, wax myrtle. Currant and elderberry aren't quite as fatty, but they're still really good. So these are all good native Northern California fruits. And always make sure you plant these in some sort of dense tree and shrub clusters so birds can hide. Good shelter. There's special things you can do for hummingbirds. You have 3 species there in Northern California. The Allens and the Rufus are climate-threatened birds that need our help. The Anna's doesn't really need our help. She is very successful and tough and is doing quite well, but the Rufus and Allens do. So the thing is to make sure you have plenty of native nectaring plants, especially in the spring and fall when the Rufus is passing back and forth. Extra hummingbird feeders. The Anna's very aggressive, so if you have 3 or 4 hummingbird feeders, then the Allens and the Rufus will still have a chance to feed. And just learn to tell them apart. It all has to do with the amount of orange on their bodies. Summer and fall water sources. When these birds are moving through and there's a drought, give them a little extra water, just a natural puddle that you keep some water in, works great, or a shallow bird wet bath. They like shallow bird baths with little steps for them to walk on. Suet is phenomenal. Warblers and pygmy nuthatches and woodpeckers will eat suet. The suet cage is the best because the little birds can get in there without the jays and crows eating all the suet. Tree cavities. Leave your dead trees standing, tree cavities, so that flammulated owls and migrating bats can spend the night in there. Put bat boxes and keep them year round. Some more ways you can help these neighborhood migrants. Citizen science, which we're going to talk more about. This helps scientists learn how animals are moving back and forth across the country. Put up window silhouettes so that birds don't crash into the window. Learn about dark sky projects, where if you keep the bright lights in your neighborhood out or at least low in the spring and fall, birds won't get disoriented during migration. Try to keep your cats indoors, especially at dawn and dusk. Close to 1 billion birds, 1 billion, are eaten by house cats every year. So we're almost done, folks. So how can you take some of this and start moving out into your community to not only do things in your yard, but beyond? Remember 3 things. Plant trees throughout your neighborhood. Shade lowers temperatures. Trees are carbon sinks, so that will help slow down climate change. They hold soil. Healthy soil is a carbon sink. So do whatever you can. I've listed some ways here to keep your soil healthy. Reduce the size of your lawn. That means less mowing, which means less fossil fuels are being used. So plant trees, keep your soils healthy, and reduce the size of your lawn. Moving even further out from your community, connecting natural corridors so that these animals can move not only for migration, but so that they can slowly shift their ranges north because of climate change. They need natural corridors to help them move north over time as they're shifting their ranges north. A really important thing to preserve are mountains and high hills. All that vertical topography ends up being refugia for climate change refugees that need somewhere colder to go. Preserve your mountains so they can go up to the top of the mountain. A couple that you have right there in Northern California, the Laguna de Santa Rosa. Of course, they used to do work to help the Laguna. And the Russian River are fantastic natural corridors that help animals go all the way from the Mayacamas to the coastal range and the ocean. If you're looking to preserve mountains and other topography, the Modini Preserve on Pine Flats Road, and 2 preserves owned by the Center for Environmental Inquiry and SSU, Osborne and Galbraith preserves are really important preserves to protect. And of course, that's a picture of Mount Lassen, which is so important. So this is the last slide. I want to talk a little bit about land habitat resilience, or terrestrial resilience, which is talking about land habitats that are adaptable to change, that are most adaptable to change. And it's basically 2 categories that tells you whether a habitat is going to have terrestrial resilience, which is all about them being able to adapt to climate change. Topoclimate, which is a combination of temperature and moisture, and permeability, which in this instance doesn't mean water filtrating through it. It means a combination of how many diverse landscapes, functioning ecological processes, and wildlife movement are happening at that habitat. When you put those 2 things together, topoclimate and permeability, landscapes get a grade, and Galbraith, which you can see in this screenshot map that I've shown you, rates from a 4 to a 5 on a scale from 1 to 6, because it's such an important preserve because of its topography. And this is from the North Pacific Landscape Conservation Cooperative. So anything you can do to preserve corridors and preserve these topo landscapes is super important. And we're running a little late, but we're now going to start our project activities.
Kevin,
Yes.
suggestion, since we are a bit late, we were thinking that maybe we can go over these, let people spend 5-6 minutes getting started on them, and then they can continue on them, working on them, and we can open it up for questions and discussion at the same time as they're working on them. Is that all right?
That's perfect. That's perfect. So Margot, I'll talk a little bit about these as people are getting started. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. So migratory waystation planning, pretty simple. You just look at the things we've just talked about. I've got a list here. Start working on a plan for your yard, for your kid's schoolyard, for your church or your business, for your neighborhood. Try to add 1 or more of these elements. You can just start jotting a list of ideas. You can make your own window decal by printing out and cutting out the link that we sent you, or you can just trace around bird images you have in magazines or books, or you can go to Amazon.com and order window decals that'll be at your house in 2 days. You want to make sure they're no more than 4 inches apart. That will really stop birds from running into your window if all your decals don't have more than 4 inches space on your windows. Register and explore a citizen science project. Journey North is one of my favorite because they have over a dozen different projects. It takes 30 seconds to register for it, and you could go out today and start making observations by just choosing one of the projects on their website. And then there are some other citizen science projects here. These are fun. You get to interact with people, and they can really make a difference. Anybody have any questions as you maybe start to dive into a couple of these as we chat?
If you'd like to unmute yourselves, if you have a question for Kevin, I think that would be fine.
Yeah, feel free.
Anything about these projects that he's outlined here, any questions you have on those?
Well, I was going to make the window clings, and I was going to go and just look through this big old bird book. Is it important that they're black shapes?
No, it is not. And they don't even have to be birds. You can trace a wildflower, a tree, a dog. It could be sort of any shape. They just need to be dark enough so the bird's going to see it. You can also order special decals that are transparent, but they give off a special polarized or ultraviolet light that birds can see.
I've seen that at Wild Care in San Rafael.
Yes, and they're available on Amazon. They're transparent, so they won't sort of mark up your windows. For just cutting out a piece of paper, which is what you're probably looking at now, Carrie, you want it to be dark enough so they can see it, but it doesn't have to be black.
Got it.
Can I ask a question about that too?
Please.
So if the decals, they have to cover the entire, because I have a lot of windows out looking over my garden. Do they have to completely cover the pane or just in spots 4 inches apart?
Anything you do will help and be effective. You could just put up a couple decals spread around your window. What's most effective, what the Cornell Lab of Ornithology has found is most helpful, is actually to get what's called bird tape.
Okay.
Which is transparent, so it won't interfere with your view. And you make lines of tape on your window that are no more than 4 inches apart, like a checkerboard.
Okay.
But you can order it on Amazon. It's transparent, so you won't even see it, but it's a special material that birds can see.
And then what happens when it rains or if you wash your windows? You have to redo the tape?
So what you're making today, the homemade do-it-yourself ones,
Right.
I would suggest you put them on the inside of your window.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Or if you put them on the outside of the window, you could just replace them after a big rain.
Right. Okay.
The types that you can buy online or in bird stores, you put on the outside, and they are impervious to weather storms and elements.
Oh, awesome.
So
Okay.
they can just be
And then I just a question about the rufous, because I had not seen them. I know I have Allens and Annas, but this year I have rufous, and they're a little aggressive too.
Mhm.
Because the Anna and the rufous occasionally really go at. I mean, it's incredible in my house. I have 3 feeders, and it's nightly, and they love to come at breakfast and cocktail hour, which we love.
Well, first of all, it's wonderful that you have all 3 species. That's so exciting to
Oh,
hear.
it's so exciting. Yeah.
And yes, all hummingbirds are pretty aggressive. They're very territorial because they're used to protecting their sort of ephemeral flower sources.
Okay.
And my experience is that the Allens and rufous, even though they're smaller, are actually able to chase off the Annas, which is bigger. The key is to provide enough feeders and enough flowers so they can all use your yard.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy to hear you have all 3.
Yeah, I was just curious because when you were talking about the migration, and I'm in Southern California, so I was curious if was new, because I haven't seen the rufous before. But I have a lot of flowers and things in my garden that attract the monarchs and dragonflies and the hummingbirds. But this was the first year I've seen them, so I was just curious if that had been a change or this was.
Could be an effect.
That I'm a birder, and this year many of my friends have had the rufous, and so it must be like a good year for them, or they've changed their route of migration, because this has been a very special year in the number that we've seen of those birds passing through.
Okay, wow. Thank you.
Exciting. It could be connected to climate change, but it might not be. Species have cycles, so it could just be a population cycle connected with wildflowers. Could be connected to fires. All the fires California's had recently could mean more flowers blooming, because a lot of fires actually are helped by fire.
Right.
So there might be more flowers and therefore more rufous hummingbirds. There's so many connections.
Yeah. Thank you.
Kevin, can you tell us a little bit about the Journey North Citizen Science Project?
Yes, and what I'm going to do, I hope this works. I am going to go ahead, and if I can find it, I am going to, if you bear with me here, I am going to try to, whoops.
While you're doing that, Kevin, a question, you go ahead and look for what you're looking for. The questions come up in the chat. Does anyone have any experience using hedgerows for pollinator habitat? Alania wants to know. Anybody? No.
Sorry about that. Okay, here we go. Can everybody, Margot, can you see the Journey North screen?
Yes.
Okay, so let me mention real quick about hedgerows. I'll just say, the more different species of shrubs and wildflowers you plant densely together in a hedgerow, the more effective. It doesn't have to be like the perfect English hedgerow. It can just be the basic concept of tight shrub clusters. So this is Journey North. as you can see, Journey North has all these separate projects that you can use all through their portal. Hummingbirds, butterflies, robins, pollinator patches. Look at all these different options you have. You just click on any one you want and you join that project. The first step is to register. Registration, it takes about 30 seconds to go here and register. And then once you've registered, you can choose any of these projects, including sunlight and seasons and tulips in your garden and earthworms and just taking a picture of your pollinator flowers. So through this one portal, you can do all these different citizen science projects. Really, really neat. Any other questions?
Feel free, and if anyone else has expertise, I see Yvette kind of answered Alania about the hedgerow question. So if Yvette, if you want to share anything, feel free and unmute.
No?
You know, I'll just say I know from looking at the email list, there are some folks on this list who have more expertise in both climate change and migration than myself. So as Carrie said, please feel free to jump in, mention some thoughts, or just give us some neat observations.
More thoughts?
I'm just having a good time tracing this bird that I'm going to then put on a dark piece of paper. I don't know if you can see that at all.
A little bit.
A little bit.
Nice.
You
know, Margot, I'll just mention another one of the things on the screen here, the North American Calling Insect Atlas. That's through iNaturalist, which you may already belong to, and it's a very user-friendly site, iNaturalist. You can go on there and document the crickets and grasshoppers and katydids you hear. That teaches us about climate change. You can also sign up for Project Feeder Watch, which is October through April, and sends in information about the birds you see feeding in your yard at your feeder, and that's used by Cornell Lab of Ornithology to, among other things, track climate change.
Well, I had a question about one of your slides, if nobody else is asking.
Go ahead.
There was a map you were showing that had the different colors, and it showed that there was this one spot near Bay Area, California, where birds weren't moving. It was the year-round patch.
Yes.
And I was wondering, is that pretty unusual that birds can stay here all the time? Or is that, like, would there be a similar map if we were in New York right now, where there's certain birds that stay in New York all year?
Sure. Most bird species, when you look at the map, they have this purple area where they stay all year round. And part of what makes the DC, Northern Virginia area that I'm from, and the Bay Area so special is it's a year-round place for many birds because it's at this north-south axis. So you're right, it is a special place, and it's part of the reason that bird watchers love the San Francisco Bay Area and they love the Washington, DC area.
Kevin, could you put your slide up again with the citizen science list on it?
Yeah, definitely. There's a quicker way to get to them, but there we go.
There we go. Great.
Pam just said thank you for the citizen science project list.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to put it up again so that to make sure that everybody got a chance to copy that. And as Kevin mentioned, this is being recorded, so we will have it, and I will let you know where you can find it on our YouTube channel when it's posted, and then you'll have that list there. And he may send out things like this, I would think, perhaps, Kevin. And actually, you should have it in the email that I sent you about the supplies.
And for the recordings, they'll always just be posted on the event website. So when you went to the center website calendar and you saw this event, we'll just post the recording at the bottom of that description paragraph. It'll be really obvious. You can send your friends there to see the recording.
Right.
And if you're looking for a resource to decide what types of plants are native to your area to attract birds. Almost every state in the country has a native plant society. I know that Northern Virginia and Northern California have two of the best native plant societies in the country. Just do a web search on Sonoma County Native Plant Society or
Milo
Fairfax.
Baker chapter.
Right, yes, there's the Milo Baker chapter is fantastic. They have a list of native hummingbird plants. Just go to their website and they list specifically native hummingbird plants for Sonoma County.
I was actually going to think about suggesting that when the question came up about pollinator hedgerows, because there's also lists for pollinators.
Yes. Yes, the Milo Baker chapter has a specific list for native pollinators. So use that as a primary resource. And wherever you are in the country, there's going to be a Native Plant Society website for you that will give you that kind of information.
Hey, Kevin, another great, can you hear me okay?
Hey, Claudia, how you doing?
Hey, Kevin, another good citizen science avenue is doing a bio blitz. I know here in Virginia, we have one on the 26th of September, and it's to document all the native everything throughout the state. And I'm certain other states have bio blitzes as well. And it's a good way to pair up with a specialist that is good at birds or trees or insects and to go out and to document them. And they also use the iNaturalist app for many of the BioBlitz. So take a look and Google in your area for any of those. They're kind of new, but it's a great way to get outside and document what's there.
Great, thank you, Claudia, for that. That's a good suggestion for people. I'm going to wrap us up and invite you to stay if you'd like to continue to chat with Kevin, but I wanted to just thank you all for your patience in the beginning. And to tell you, this is, I mentioned before, this is the first of our 20 programs that we're offering. And we hope you'll go to our website, cei.sonoma.edu/calendar, to look at the other events if you haven't already done so. Sign up for as many as you wish. We welcome everyone to come and join us. Our next event is going to be wildfire links to earthquakes. And that's as we are still dealing with wildfires in Northern California. This, I think, is a very timely issue, talking about our area's geologic formations and features and how they impact the wildfires that we are seeing year after year. After that, we have our Spanish language program, which will be dealing with sea turtles and the impact that COVID-19 is having on them. So if you have any other questions or comments or whatnot, I think you all have my email, and I welcome any thoughts or suggestions, or if you're interested in leading an event sometime, let us know that. We have lots of interesting different types of formats that we use, and really appreciate all of you coming. And I think Kevin is going to hang on a little bit, and we'll stay here for a bit longer. If any of you have any other things you would like to discuss, you can unmute yourselves and have at it. Thank you all very much for coming.